Part 2, inside your grieving heart. Let's get into it. There's a lot of emotions that can come with grief. Shock, denial, sadness, fear, guilt, and depression are just the beginning of it. Some feel like they're losing control, both physically and mentally. There's a phrase that I want you to remember, though, and I'm talking to those who want to help someone else go through their grief. And that phrase is this: I can make a difference. Say that one more time. I can make a difference. We can meet those who are grieving where they are. We can be a safe person that listens and loves. We can choose to walk with them in their grief, feel their pain, and win their trust on a deeper level. We can be real and authentic about our own grief journeys, helping them realize that they're not alone, that they're not crazy, and that they can survive this. We need to be open about pain, death, grief, and love in age-appropriate ways, especially if you're dealing with children and youth who are dealing with grief. The first part I want to focus on in learning the grief inside our heart is acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is the best medicine. Naming this craziness is so powerful. It helps to know what's normal when nothing feels normal. You want to have them tell their story a lot. Tell your story a lot. Repetition is a safety and coping mechanism. We tell the story over and over because the story needs to be told. We're looking for some way of this making sense, even if it can't. And if you're struggling to tell the story verbally, it's okay. Try journaling, writing it out, painting it out, making a fun graphic novel out of it. It's an immense relief to tell your story without somebody trying to fix it. Part 2 is to be angry in your pain and suffering. Anger is this response to a sense of injustice. This loud expression of rage, this becomes a fierce, protective love for yourself, for the one you've lost, and in some cases, it gives you the energy to face what you need to face. Anger tells the story of love, connection, and longing for what was once lost. And it's also okay to ask people how they feel about hearing your anger. It helps them get prepared to really listen and allows you to know whether they can hear what's true without trying to get you to rush through your anger. So, before we get too much further, I want to talk about what the difference is between pain and suffering. Pain is the typical healthy, normal response to that your body feels when someone you love is torn away from you. Suffering, though, comes from when we feel dismissed or unsupported in our pain. And it can come from a lot of places, such as these. Suffering can come from being told not to feel what you feel. Suffering can come from being told that there is something wrong with what you feel. Suffering can come from others adding words to you that they want to help and they're meaning it with every good intention, but it's just not working. Suffering comes from when we don't eat, don't get enough sleep, we spend a lot of time with toxic people, or we just avoid how we're feeling. Suffering comes from when we rehash the events that led to grief, punishing ourselves from not preventing it. So when we're walking through this, I want you to pay attention to the data that comes out of this grief. Pay attention to the subtle shifts in how you feel. Try and write down the things that you notice. Ask yourself the following questions. Are there times you feel more stable or grounded or able to breathe inside this loss? Are there activities or interactions that make this feel just a little softer or just a little gentler? Are there activities or environments that absolutely make things worse? Mapping out all these subtleties is like mapping out your own grief, your own suffering. And it's letting you know what can be changed and what can be avoided. So, a question you may be asking is, what can I do to treat my pain? Be kind to yourself. Allow the pain you feel to exist without judgment. Trust yourself. Say yes to what helps and say no to what doesn't. Allow yourself to sleep as much as you need without punishing yourself for it. Say no to that social engagement. Cut yourself some slack. Remember that grief increases or affects your respiration, your breathing, your heart rate, your nervous system responses. These are all deeply affected when you've lost somebody close. In addition to the physical effects, there's cognitive changes, memory loss, confusion, shortened attention spans. These are all common in the early parts of grief. The response to this is self-care, finding those small ways to care for your physical body that can help reduce your suffering. Regarding the mental side of it, just know and please remember that you are not crazy. You've probably lost interest in things. Your mind may have changed. Your memory and attention span are virtually non-existent. Your brain has to understand now and piece together this new reality because you haven't experienced anything like this before. So your brain is trying to work it all together to make this new reality. Now, let's talk about the connection between grief and anxiety. There are definitely short-term and long-term approaches to managing your anxiety while you're grieving. One of the short-term approaches is called soothing the system. And it's when you feel anxious, you do your breathing meditations and you just make your exhale longer than your inhale. So you'd inhale for, say, 4 seconds and exhale for 6. Studies show that modifying your breathing helps soothe the nervous system when it's agitated, oftentimes when you're feeling anxious. Lengthening your exhale, your nervous system shuts down the flood of stress hormones that trigger the anxiety. And doing this also soothes the fight or flight response in the nervous system. And the focus of your breath gives you an anchoring thought in your mind rather than chasing the one fear thought to the next. In the long term, reducing the frequency and overall amount of anxiety comes in 3 parts. Learning to trust yourself, replacing the disaster scenarios with more positive images, so essentially quit what-ifing, and finding this neutral space that you're neither rehearsing disaster nor falling back into denial. But at the end of the day, ask yourself, what exactly do I need? And tell yourself the truth. The practice of asking yourself what you need and taking the most likely to be effective course of action to meet those needs actually builds a sense of safety for you in the world. And as a long-term approach to anxiety, telling the truth and asking yourself what you need is highly effective. And before we close, there's one term that I want you to avoid, whether you're helping or dealing with it yourself, and that's recovery. By the definition, to recover means to restore oneself to a normal state, to regain what was lost, or to be compensated for what was taken. In grief, you know you're not getting the one who passed away back. There is no recovery. In grief, recovery is more about 3 different things: listening to your wounds, being honest about your devastation, and cultivating the patience. Patience to just sit there and take as much time as you need. That does wrap us up for part 2 of this. Next week, I'm going to talk about the advice that I can give to the people that are helping others through their anxiety. So again, this is for those that are helpers. So until then, stay blessed.